Hey friends, welcome to the PAULCAST. I'm sitting here in my office and today is a treat, y'all. We get to hear from Dr. Gary Chapman, 86 years old, still kicking, still sharp. And this is the author of over 60 different books on marriage and family. And he's talking with me today. We're doing an interview all about the 5 love languages, which is one of the most renowned books out there on relationships. How do you love your spouse well? How do you love your friend well? Your boyfriend, girlfriend, your family, whatever relationship you need help in. This guy wrote a book for it, The 5 Love Languages. And so him and I are going to have about a 30 to 40 minute talk. You're about to hear it here in just a second. But if you have not subscribed to this on the podcast or YouTube channel, make sure you do. Share this with a friend. We're going to keep uploading more episodes right here on the PAULCAST and interviews like this where we just talk about marriage, family, ministry, life, parenting, growing up and trying to do what God's called you to do while you're learning yourself, how to do what you're doing. So anyways, we're going to get right into the interview now with Dr. Gary Chapman. Here it is. First off, thank you for saying yes to coming. Thank you for scheduling to do your conference here and then also to stay over and speak at the church on Sunday. We really appreciate it. And I was just going to ask, where are you from?
North Carolina, Winston-Salem.
Okay, nice. Is that where you've lived your whole life?
Well, not my whole life, but we've been here since 1967.
Wow.
Long time. But I grew up an hour south of here.
Okay.
Yeah. We're in the middle of North Carolina.
In the mountains or in the city?
No, we're in the rolling hills.
The rolling hills.
North Carolina has 3 distinct areas. You have the mountains in the west, rolling hills where I am, and then you go to the coast and it gets flat.
Okay, nice. And are you a Duke fan or a Tar Heels fan?
Well, let's say this. I did graduate work at Duke. I did graduate work at Carolina. I did graduate work at Wake Forest.
Oh.
I just go with the winner.
There you go. Nice. Well, how did you get into writing about the 5 love languages? What kind of led you into that journey of wanting to write about that?
Well, it actually grew out of my counseling. Over and over again in my counseling office, one of them would say something like, I just don't feel any love coming from them. I mean, we're cordial, but it's just nothing's really going on between us, and I feel empty. And the other person would respond with, I don't understand that. I do this and this and this and this. I don't know why you wouldn't feel loved. And I realized that people were sincere. In their mind, they were expressing love to the person. But emotionally, it wasn't connecting with the other person. Yeah. And I heard that over and over in my office. So finally, I took time to sit down and read several years of notes that I made when I was counseling and asked myself, when someone said, I feel like my spouse doesn't love me, what did they want? What were they complaining about?
Yeah. And
their answers fell into 5 categories. And I later called them the 5 love languages. And I started using that in my counseling. That if you want her to feel love, you've got to learn to express love in her language. If you want him to feel love, you've got to learn to show love in his language. And I would help couples discover their language and challenge them to go home and try it. And sometimes they'd come back in 3 weeks and say, Gary, this is changing everything. The whole climate's different now. And then I started teaching it to small groups in our church. Same thing would happen. It was probably 5 years later before I thought, if I could put this in a book and write it in the language of the common person, leave out psychological terms and even theological terms that a lot of people wouldn't understand, maybe I could help a lot of people. I would never have time to see in my office. So that's what motivated me to write it, and that's where it came from.
Wow. And that book came out how many years ago now?
It's been out now 32 years. Came out in 1992.
1992.
And for most of those years, it sold more every year than it did the year before.
Wow. Did you ever expect it to get to the level it did? Did you feel like it was going to go there?
Oh, no, I never had that thought. I knew it would help people because, as I said, I'd been using it, and I knew it would help people. But no, I had no idea. And they tell me it's sold over 20 million copies now. and it's been published in over 50 languages around the world, which the whole thing blows my mind.
That's
it's
incredible.
just amazing to me. Yeah.
That's incredible. Well, my wife and I read it, and it definitely spoke to us. And we're going to be rereading it this month, leading up to you coming next week, and just refreshing ourselves on our 5 love languages, where we rank. But I was going to ask you, what are your 5 love languages? What's your number one?
Well, my number one is words of affirmation.
Okay.
And my wife?
Same here.
My wife is acts of service.
Okay.
So I wash dishes, I vacuum floors, I clean toilets. She tells me I'm the greatest husband in the world.
And what does she do for you? How does she affirm you? What does she speak to you?
She gives me positive words all the time. Tells me how much she appreciates what I do, how good I am, how much she loves me, just all kinds of things.
Come on.
Yep.
That's
now, we had our struggles in the early years when I didn't know anything about love languages. We had lots of struggles in those early stages of our marriage, and that's probably why I've devoted so much of my time trying to help others, because I have empathy for people that feel like, we're just too different. It's not working. We're not connecting. We have negative feelings. We end up arguing. And so I have empathy for that, because I remember when we went through, that struggle, those struggles in our marriage. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
As a young pastor, I'm in my 30s, and I took over after my dad passed of cancer 15 years ago. He died. My mom stepped in as an interim pastor for a few years, and then she said, Paul, it's time for you to step in. When I stepped in, I was 28, and I've been doing it for 10 years now. But I told our church, I said, I get very intimidated to preach on the topic of marriage and family relationships, because I'm such a work in progress. Like, I am very unqualified when it comes to, I haven't raised these kids. I have 5 kids, and I haven't raised them yet to find out if they're all going to do everything right, And in my marriage, Ashley and I, we've just had our arguments. We've had our moments of just feeling like, man, I want to be a better husband, want to be a better wife, want to have stronger marriage. And so preaching on it, teaching on it for me is very daunting. I'm like, who am I to teach on this? Which is why I really wanted you to come in and teach on it. And I'm like, I'm going to bring in the professional, the one who's figured it all out, because I'm still figuring it out. But I did tell our church, I said, one thing I will say is that God uses imperfect people to communicate really powerful truths about God's word in marriage and in family. And that's who I am on this stage, someone who's in need of constant grace and patience and the love of God to grow into who I'm called to be. And I'm excited for you to teach from a more professional standpoint, as the one who's probably had, more years of growing and maturing, which I'm still learning. But talk a little bit about stepping into the shoes of teaching on marriage and family while you were learning yourself how to be a good husband, how to be a good dad, and all of that.
Well, in the early days, I wasn't teaching anyone.
Yeah.
2 weeks after we got married, I enrolled in seminary to study to be a pastor. And while I was in seminary, we were struggling, and had some really, really hard times. And I never, ever thought that my vocation would end up, having a role of counseling other people in marriage. In those early years, I would never have thought that. In fact, even when I just retired from being an associate pastor at our church, I was on the staff for 50 years. And I went into the pastor and I said, I think after 50 years, I should get off the payroll. And he said, well, Gary, you're not going to leave us. I said, well, I'll be around. I'll do whatever you want me to do. Yeah. He said, look, why don't you keep your office and keep your assistant, and you can do what you want to do. I said, oh, okay. I like that.
There you go.
So if I'm in town, I'm still seeing people every day, trying to help. So, but even when I came to this church, counseling was not even in my job description. I came as an associate pastor to direct the adult education program in our church and to focus on starting a college ministry. And that was where I gave a lot of my time to the college students, but never ever thought about moving into counseling. But when I started teaching classes, because we started at what we call the Christian Education Institute on Sunday night and had courses on different topics. Some of them would be marriage. And so I would teach a class on marriage, because in my college class that I taught on Sunday morning, I would take about 10 weeks every year and just say, look, you may not even be dating yet, but someday you're probably going to get married. So let's learn what the Bible has to say about marriage, you know. And of course, by this time we had our marriage together, you know, as well. So, but what happened when I started teaching classes, people who were hurting really wanted to talk to me because they heard things I was teaching in the class, you know, and they wanted. So I kind of got pushed into counseling, but it became a major part of my ministry. You know, for a number of years and years, I was seeing 25 couples a week, which nobody told me that was too many, but it was too many. So I learned as I went in terms of the teaching part of it. And the same thing's true really in our marriage. We learn as we grow, as we go along, you know, and we're always growing. Or we're regressing. We don't stand still. You know, we're getting better or we're getting worse.
Did you ever have to get up and teach a seminar on the 5 love languages or a session after a tough moment at home with family, with your spouse? And was it, how did you do that? Or have you always gone into every session just with the most perfect day ever back home?
No, there are times that I had to ask her to forgive me before I got up to lead this session, because I realized I just blew it, you know.
Wow.
But I learned early on that if you're going to have a good marriage, you've got to learn how to apologize.
Yeah.
Because none of us are perfect, and you don't have to be perfect to have a healthy marriage, but you do have to deal with your failures, because the failures create a barrier between us, an emotional barrier, and that barrier does not go away with the passing of time. We have to come back and apologize. They have to choose to forgive us, and then the barrier is removed, and now we can go forward. So I think apology is an essential to a healthy marriage.
When you wrote 5 love languages, and let me just say thank you for sharing that transparency. Thanks for talking about that, because I think being in the world with a lot of preachers, pastors, where I'm interacting with them, they're coming to speak at our church or I'm standing with them, there's not a whole lot of pastors that will talk about the reality that we're getting up on stage and we're communicating truths from God's word, but we're going home and we're facing the reality that we're still human and our families are still human. And so we're teaching things that we are still ourselves learning to live out. Like you just said, I think recognizing that there's been sermons I've had to get up before I preach and just say, Ashley, I'm sorry. Please forgive me for the way that I acted today, for the way that I spoke today, the reactions. And she's like, you're just asking me that so you can preach. And I'm like, no, I'm asking you that because I don't want to get on that stage with any feelings of hurt or anger or pride that I have not owned, that I could have handled that better. You know, so we learn through it. But I think one thought I was going to say on what you just said about apologizing is such a big deal. Why do you feel like it's hard for people to apologize when they miss it in relationships, in marriage?
Well, I think all of us like to think that we're better than we are, you know, and that the real problem, if we have a problem, it's in the other person. Mm-hmm. In fact, I deal with that in my conference, you know, that by nature, if we have a problem, any couple has a problem. And I say, tell me what's going on. And they'll tell me the problem is their spouse, you know, and we like to think that we're the one that's mature.
Yeah.
The fact is we're all immature. We're all in the process of growth. So that's why I think just being open and honest. And my wife agreed years ago that if we were going to help other people, we had to be honest about our own struggles. Mm. So when I write all of my books, my wife is the editor of all of my books. She edits them before they ever go off to the publisher.
Wow.
So that she knows exactly what I'm saying. But she was an English major. So she works on my sentence structure. She
actually knows how to edit this thing right.
Yeah. So Moody Publishers tells me that my manuscripts are the cleanest they ever get. And I say, well, that's because of Carolyn.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but I don't ever share anything publicly about our struggles. that we haven't already agreed on, but we both have agreed we're just going to be honest about, our struggles.
What about, how long have y'all been married?
63 years.
Wow. So you are how old?
86.
86. You look really good for being 86.
Well, I feel 66.
Come on. I told our church, I said, he's 80, but I didn't realize you were 86. I said, this is a big deal. And the church clapped. They were like, they think it's awesome that you're coming to speak, because you really are a general on this, a general of faith in the specific category of relational understanding, relationships, which is the most powerful thing in the Bible, is our relationships with each other and our relationship with God. And so I think I'm just still so honored that you said yes to come speak at Victory. And I know you're not speaking everywhere, but thanks for coming to Victory. Thanks for coming to Tulsa. And this podcast, I don't want to take too much of your time. So I'll ask you just a few more questions, or if you got questions for me or anything you want to share, then we can do that. But I was going to ask you, what is a example of a memorable success story from someone that you counseled with the love languages in a way that transformed their marriage, and you got to see it happen in real time over the last 60 years?
Well, there's many of those experiences, but one that really stands out in my mind is I went to hospice to see a man who was at the point of death that I had counseled many years ago, he and his wife. And when I went there, I walked in and he said, Dr. Chapman, I'm so glad you're here. He said, we're planning my funeral and you can help us. So I took out my pen and pencil, we just kind of worked through the funeral. And when I got through, I said, okay, well, now let me pray for you. So I took his hand. His wife went on the other side of the bed and took his hand. And then I reached across the bed and held her hand. And I prayed for both of them. And then I released his hand and released her hand. But he held on to her hand and he brought it to his face and he kissed her hand. And when he did, I started crying, because I remembered 35 years earlier when they came to my office and said, we have no hope for our marriage.
Wow.
We don't even like each other. And I remember I said to them, I can understand how you can get to that place. I remember the struggles in my own marriage. So would you be willing to go on my hope for you? Because I have hope for you. And if you're willing to go on my hope, then I'll meet with you on a regular basis and we'll just see what happens. We'll try to change some things and see what happens. And I remember about 9 months later, they walked out of my office holding hands and said to me, if anyone had ever told us that we would ever have love feelings for each other again, we would not have believed it, because we were just so different and things were just so bad. Now here they are 35 years later at the end of the journey.
Wow.
So, those things are the rewards, I think, the human rewards on the human level for helping people who have no hope, learn that there is hope. Because we're human and humans can make decisions, we do make decisions every day to make things better or to make things worse. And as Christians, of course, we have the outside help of God. God, you ask God for wisdom, God gives you wisdom. You ask God to help you make changes, he helps you make changes. So, that's the rewarding thing. I think any counselor would say that's the present reward that we have for helping people with their marriages.
Wow. That's beautiful. I love that. What about outside of marriage? Using the 5 love languages within family relationships, father to daughter, mother to son, or even brother and brother, sister and brother. Have you seen in those non-romantic relationships a cool testimony of God bringing people together in families that had drifted apart through this? Or in your practice of sitting and counseling people, did you see how it affected the whole family household, and maybe a story from that or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it applies in all human relationships. I have about, 10 or 12 spin-off books. One is the 5 love languages of children, because to parents, I say the question is not, do you love your children? The question is, do your children feel loved?
Mm.
And if we're not speaking their primary language, they may grow up with what I call an empty love tank.
Wow.
And then I wrote one for parents of teenagers, because teenagers don't change their love language, but you have to use new dialects, because whatever you've been doing, they consider childish. And they're teenagers now. They don't want you to treat them like a child.
Wow.
And then I have one for blended families, how this works in a blended family, step parent, stepchild, and how it works with adopted children, and how it helps a couple who've lost a baby at birth, keeping them together in the midst of that process, because we process grief in different ways.
Wow.
So and one for caregivers of dementia patients. I wrote it with a medical doctor whose wife had dementia. And how do you keep love alive as memories begin to fade? So it has application in all of those things. But I'll tell you one of the most dynamic stories that come to my mind. And it wasn't a counseling thing. I was actually speaking in a prison. And I said, I'd like to, there was about, 200 men that were there for that meeting. I said, I'd like to try to explain to you why you either felt love growing up or you did not feel love growing up. And I shared the love languages in that context. And when we got to the Q&A, a young man stood up and said, I judged him to be about 30 years old. He said, I want to thank you for coming, because for the first time in my life, I finally understand my mother loves me. He said, you gave those languages, and I knew my language was physical touch, but my mother never hugged me. He said, the only memory I have of her hugging me was the day I left for prison. He said, but you gave those other love languages. And I realized my mother spoke acts of service. He said she was a single mom. She had 2 jobs to get food for us. She fed me. She kept my clothes clean. And he just rattled off all these things his mother did. And by this time he was just sobbing. And he said, Mama loves me. Mama loves me. Mama loves me. And I started crying.
I'm like about to cry right now. That's powerful.
So I think, there are many fractured relationships today between young adult children and their parents. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they didn't feel love growing up, even though the parents was loving them. They were loving them, but they didn't get it. And when that adult child and the parent can get the love language concept, it can bring reconciliation in that relationship.
Yeah.
So that we can look back and realize, oh, they were loving me. And the parent can say, oh, I see now why you didn't feel loved. And, there can be a reconciliation. So, it has application in all human relationships.
Wow. That's a beautiful story. I love that. That's so powerful. Okay, another question for you. In your view, how do cultural differences influence the understanding and expression of love languages, and are there any adaptations or considerations for different cultural contexts?
Well, this is really what surprised me most of all, that it was published in other languages. As I said, over 50 languages now. Because I did an undergraduate major. I did a master's degree and an undergraduate degree in cultural anthropology, studying cultures all over the world and how they're organized and how they differ. And I had a keen sense of cultural differences. So when the Spanish publisher came to get the rights to publish it in Spanish, they were the first. I said to my publisher, I don't know if this works in Spanish. I discovered this in Middle America, and I don't know if this works in Spanish. And they said, well, they've read the book, and they want to publish it. I said, well, okay. It became their bestseller.
Wow.
So here's what I think about the cultural differences. I wasn't dogmatic in the beginning, that even to accept the reality that these would work in other cultures. But at this juncture, I really feel like the 5 languages are pretty fundamental to human nature. Now, the dialects of these languages, which I call dialects, which is ways of speaking these languages, will differ from culture to culture. For example, there are cultures in which 2 men who are friends, when they meet each other, they kiss each other on the cheek. Well, you and I wouldn't do that. We shake hands or give a high five. So there are those cultural differences. And I'm sure that when it's translated, they take that into account. But the languages, the 5 languages, are, I think, still fundamental. It's just different dialects and different cultures of those languages. Yeah.
Have you gone and spoken in a lot of other countries on the five love languages, or just allowed your book to do the speaking in all these other countries?
So I've spoken in over 20 languages. I mean, I've led conferences in over 20 languages.
Wow.
20 countries. And just before the pandemic, I was in Hungary.
Wow.
And I found out, I had no idea they'd published this many books. They published 35 of my books in Hungarian. I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
And everywhere we went, it was a 5-city tour. Every night, it was a sellout crowd. And in Budapest, on Saturday, it seated 2,000. They sold it out a month ahead of time.
Oh my
and
goodness.
Then they asked me if I'd do an afternoon session. And I did that, and they sold it out. It was amazing to me to see the hunger, in Hungary,
The hunger in Hungary.
for help or love. So yeah, it's been amazing to me, really. It's not something I could have done. People sometimes ask me, what do you think the success? How do you explain the success of the five love languages? I say, well, to me, the short answer is God, and the long answer is God. I said I couldn't have made that happen if I wanted to make it happen, But I think on the human level, because it addresses one of our deepest emotional needs, and that is the need to feel loved, and helps couples learn how to express love and meet that need in marriage, meet that need with their children, and then in all other close human relationships.
That's so true.
And in the conference that we're going to do there, I'm not going to just discuss the five love languages. We have 5 different sessions, and one of them's on communication.
Yeah.
Because we can't process life in a healthy way if we don't learn to talk and listen to each other, especially learn to listen to each other, and how to solve conflicts without arguing.
Yeah.
And, and then I discuss, if you just sat down and said, I want to have a better marriage, where would you start? Most people start the wrong place. And have a whole session on making sex a mutual joy. I mean, the sexual part of a marriage is an important part of marriage, but for many couples, they're struggling in this area. And then, we end up with, how do you share the things that bug you? Just the little irritations. How do you share them in a positive way, rather than in a condemning way? And yeah, we do discuss the love language, have a whole session on the love languages as well. But, the conference is designed not just for hurting couples. It's for couples that have good marriages that want to have better marriages.
Yeah.
And we have all ages that come. Couples been married 30, 40, and 50 years, because not only am I trying to help them, but I'm trying to give them tools that they can help other couples, and everybody has friends that need help. So, and we have young couples. We even have single adults who come who just want to learn, what is marriage all about? How does this really work? Because they've seen so many divorces, and they want help. So it's, hopefully we'll have people of all ages there. That's what usually happens.
That's my prayer. My prayer is that we would have singles, married people, people dating, people engaged. But my prayer is that it wouldn't just feel like this conference is only for the married couples, but that people who have a vision for one day a healthy marriage, healthy family relationships. And so I'm excited for that. All right, let me ask you this. Out of all the places you've traveled to, what would be some of your top favorite places you've gone and spoken from on your book?
It would have to be Hungary, and I'll tell you why. It's not just that we had huge crowds that came, but it was the backstory to what happened in Hungary. When the communists took over in that country, the First Baptist Church of Budapest, the pastor and his wife were sent to the countryside, and the communists took over their building. And the young man who is now the president of the Christian publishing company there was the son of that pastor. And so he grew up in the country. Later went off to the university. While he was at the university, one weekend, he got the opportunity to go to England for an intervarsity Christian fellowship. He and 2 of his buddies, they went there and they met John Stott, a well-known pastor there. And they also realized InterVarsity Christian Fellowship had published so many books for college students. They came back on campus and they translated one or two of those books, handwritten, and used it in small groups of college students. Well, this person went on to be a medical doctor. But when the communists finally left, a number of years later, those three guys got together and said, why don't we start a Christian publishing company? And they started the publishing company. And in the beginning, they published InterVarsity Christian books, which were kind of giving, reasons for belief in Christianity and in Christ. But when they published the 5 love languages, it became their bestseller.
Wow.
And then they wanted to publish my other books and so forth. So when the whole thing was over that week after I was there, or the end of the week, I met with all the staff of the publishing company. And this gentleman said, Dr. Chapman, this is the greatest thing we've ever done for our country. And tears just came to my eyes, because just knowing the backstory of how that publishing company even came to be and what he had been through, it just shows that God is working behind the scenes in every country.
Yes.
We don't hear a lot about all of it, but God is working everywhere to further his purpose and to get the message out that God loves people and God wants them to have a relationship with him.
Yes, that's beautiful. So in your pastoral work, have you always served as the associate pastor, or did you serve as the senior pastor?
Always served as the associate pastor, though 2 different occasions I was the interim pastor, once for 2 years and once for 15 months. But I sensed early on that the senior pastor was not my role. I just sensed, that God had prepared me for a different role. And I always had great relationships with my senior pastors, but I've worked with four senior pastors over those years. The first one I worked with, he was here 39 years, and I was with him 30. I was with him 30 of those years before he had to retire.
That's amazing.
But it's been very rewarding to be in the same place, in the same church, over the years, and see it grow. I mean, when I came here, we had about 500 people that were attending, and it grew to, 6,000 at one time. Of course, COVID cut it way back, as you know. So we're recovering from all that, and I'm very grateful for the pastor we have now. He's been with us now for about 3. In fact, we called him during COVID, but he had been on our staff earlier for 12 years as a youth pastor. So we knew him and he knew us. He actually grew up in the church. So I told him when I stepped off the staff, I said, Pastor, after 50 years, I can step off the staff and feel great, because I believe the church is in good hands. And that's really how I feel, and the church is just doing well. It's just so encouraging to see it. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I love that. I love the story of staying with the church that long. We actually, today, we celebrated our kids' pastor. She's been with us for 10 years. And so we called it a staying party. Because, churches, we always are doing these going away parties. Someone finishes a retirement party, they're done. But I said, we're going to throw a staying party, a party that celebrates that somebody is staying with the church and they're staying in their role, and they've done it for 10 years. So I think that's awesome. I think that's a great testimony of your life. And how many books have you written?
To be honest, I don't know. It's over 60.
Over 60 books. Okay. And your favorite, what would be your favorite book?
Well, it has to be the 5 love languages, just because it's made such a great impact on so many people,
Okay.
But there are others that I really like. I wrote a book for people in the second half of marriage called Married and Still Loving It, the joys and challenges of the second half. And so I really have enjoyed that book as well. And then I wrote one called God Speaks Your Love Language. People kept asking me, what's God's love language? And I just kind of walked through the Bible again and realized, God speaks all 5 fluently.
Yeah.
Old Testament and New Testament.
That's beautiful. I love that. Well, we look forward to having you here. Thank you for saying yes, and we'll see you soon right back here in Tulsa. Is this your first time to Tulsa?
If I've been there, it's been a long time ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we look forward to seeing you in about a week right here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we love you. Thanks for joining us today. God bless you.
You're welcome, and I'm looking forward to being there.
Yes,
right.
sir.
God bless you.
All right. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
Y'all, that was a powerful interview with Dr. Gary Chapman. I don't know about you, but I was like, I could just sit and listen to this man for hours because he's full of wisdom, he's full of experience, 86 years, and then 60 plus years being married and doing ministry, working as an associate pastor. I just wanted to ask him so many more questions, but I was like, I need to honor this man's, age and his time. And I just want to encourage you, after you listen to this, go get his books, go like download the 5 Love Languages on Audible or whatever it is where you read that. And then also, we had him come and speak a conference and a full weekend at Victory. And so make sure you go on our YouTube channel to go and listen to the message that we upload from the weekend services that he was here. It's powerful. We love you. God bless you. Stay tuned on the PAULCAST for more episodes.